listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast with your host, Andy Plymer. Bringing you up-to-date coaching concepts from the world of rugby. Sharing ideas to make the game better.
Welcome to episode 98 of the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. I'm your host, Andy Plymer, and joining me today is Ryan Schultz. Ryan is the first 15 head coach at ACGS in Brisbane, better known as Churchie, who compete in the GPS competition. He's coached extensively in and around Brisbane, having had roles with St Patrick's College, Gregory Terrace, Brothers Rugby Club, and the Queensland Reds U18 team as head coach. And it's a pleasure to have him on the show. So welcome, Ryan.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks for having me. Very excited to be having a discussion about rugby on your awesome podcast.
Oh, thanks, mate. Yeah, no, it's good to connect. And, you know, we're talking off air there about some a few guests that I've had on the pod before that you've had a few things to do with. So good to chat and good to talk things. Brisbane rugby, it's the epicenter of rugby in Australia, with the Reds winning the Super Rugby title. So many New South Wales people will be disappointed in that, but that's the way she goes. What's your backstory? You grew up in Brisbane. You when did you start playing? What was your club story and so on?
Yeah, so I'm a Brisbane boy, born and raised. Started playing rugby in Year 5 when I attended St Pat's at Shorncliffe, which tends to be the story for a lot of rugby players. They go to a private school and get introduced to rugby. Fell in love with it. Kept playing throughout. Left school and transitioned into the North Rugby Club. Former Wallaby great Chris Roach was leading the programs there at that point in time, and put a lot of investment in getting players out of schools and building the Colts program and building the first grade program there. So we had a really good group go through that period into Colts into first grade. With limited success, we had probably culminated in a really good team where we won 7 from 7 at the start of the season, and then player drain to representative footy and injuries sort of took toll, and we didn't win a game for the rest of the season. But from that team, we had Jesse Mogg, who's obviously played for the Wallabies in France. A gun player called Blair Connor, who ended up playing for Bordeaux in the top 14 for 10 years. Ida Vaya went to the Brumbies. Michael Bond's playing in Japan now. So it was a quality team, and I wouldn't give it up for anything. But post that season, I ended up transitioning over to Brothers and played the rest of a couple of years at Brothers. And my first year there, we made the first grade grand final. So it was awesome going from having limited to success to playing a grand final. But yeah, then sort of had a one-off stint down in Randwick for a little bit, and played a few little regional rep teams and that sort of stuff. But always aspired to be better than I was. And I think I'm still chasing that sort of in the coaching game now.
Yeah, of course. I think that's the story for many of us, mate. Yeah. Cool. So what about those first coaching experiences? What were those like? How'd you get roped into it, and what was that those first few experiences like?
It's probably the same like a lot of rugby people. They go back to where they started, and I started coaching, I think it was the 14 Thieves, which was probably one of the most lowest teams at St Pat's, with a mate, and sort of just kept in the game from there. Even when I was playing footy, I was always coaching. I actually started out at St Pat's a couple of years after I graduated in a athlete development role, just sort of running the gym and being a sports assistant, getting kits together and helping out the director of sport there. And that actually progressed into different roles up until where I am now. But being able to coach rugby, cricket, track and field throughout the year was it was an awesome footing for me.
Yeah, for sure. That's like living the dream, really.
Well, it was at that stage, that's for sure.
Yeah. And what were those first kind of learnings like when you first year? What were some of the things you were like, okay, I'm good at this. Maybe I'm, a little underprepared in these areas.
No, I think like everyone, you start out coaching like you were coached. So I kind of look back and don't know what I was thinking. But that's all I knew back then. I actually took on the first 15 at St. Pat's when I think it was around 22.
Okay.
And actually, that's it's a real critical turning point in my coaching. Like I look back on that. It was negative how I was coaching, but it motivates me now to ensure that I'm always learning and growing and trying to bring the best out of people. I think when you're young and naive, you coach on emotion. You're more outcome focused rather than the actual process. And we had a pretty good group that year, and I look back and I feel really sorry for how I coached those young fellas. But as I said, it's all learning, and I utilise that to make sure that I'm trying to be better all the time.
Yeah, no, I think I'm exactly the same. My first couple of years, for sure. And I think Dave Rennie said it best when he was talking about Quade Cooper. He's referring to him as he was a bit young and dumb in the early years. I think that can be expanded to coaches as well. So that's how you grow, and that's the good stuff about it. And you've had a bunch of coaching experience since then, and over a period of 10 years. Can you give a bit of a brief summary of the roles and how that's helped you grow as a coach moving forward?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I started at St. Pat's, getting an athlete development program up and running. So we had a little gym in a back room of the pool area that we started a strength conditioning program in. And from that role, it sort of progressed into taking some coordinator roles with cricket and rugby, and then coaching a team in those sports every year. And then that progressed into some sports administration, and I ended up in a role there called Sports Development and Performance Coordinator. So I basically tried to oversee the development and performance of all the sporting programs. So looking at coach development, the alignment of philosophies in each sport, and then also tying in the athlete development program into the little sports. So that was actually
cool.
A really cool role, but it gave me the opportunity to firstly develop programs, work on coach development in a multitude of sports, implement that into training structures and regimes and that sort of stuff. But also then, as I said, like coaching. So I was coaching cricket, you'd be coaching rugby, you'd be coaching every afternoon of the week. I got into the junior representative pathway through the school representative opportunities. So you'd be coaching under 12s regional teams, under 15 regional teams, get into the Reds pathway. So I think that the awesome part of the early part of my journey was I was just coaching. I was able to develop things, try things out that didn't work, work with people, manage people. All trying to get the best out of individuals of the team, but then also trying to generate team performance as well. So I'm sure I did many of the things wrong, but also learn a whole heap that I still use today in my coaching. In all aspects of a program.
Yeah, I think I was just listening to you talk about that, and it reminded me of Andy Friend when he was on the podcast, and he referred to it as just time in the saddle, and just how when you have those opportunities, and because we were talking a little bit about being a dad and family life and all that kind of stuff, and how you can't always have those opportunities, but when you get them, you just got to pack them in, and you really got to take advantage of that. And I love that. Coaching those different kind of age levels and representative teams and social teams and kids teams, and it lets me know that there's some strands across it that, like, no matter what the team is, you got to do certain things, and other teams you just can't touch that, or you have to address that. So I find that really beneficial.
Yeah, and that's what I think the beauty of coaching. There's some consistent things that you need to do well, and things that I do in cricket worked in rugby and vice versa. And more around that, the people side of it in terms of the relationships you build, how you communicate, and how you try to, even from like the skill acquisition side, how you design practices to develop the skills of the player and that sort of stuff. It's there's certainly some crossover and consistency throughout coaching, that's for sure.
Yeah, agree. And that's what I was leaning towards. Like, every program should have an element of fun. It should have an element of camaraderie, and you should be able to articulate your ideas really well and be able to plan a session that touches in on the most recent coaching science, not the kind of stuff that we would have started coaching with. So no, great point. All right, you've just wrapped up your first season with the first 15 at Churchie. Before we get into that role, what's a bit of backstory on Churchie? It's got a storied history in terms of rugby in Australia, but also some Wallabies that have come out of there. What's the story of that school?
Obviously, a very proud and school with a extensive history. Churchie was formed in 1912, and doing a little bit of research as I commenced, I think the first involvement of rugby was back in 1918. Crazy when you think about it, over 100 years ago. And I think they first formally got into schools competition because rugby league was big back then, in around 1920.
Unfortunately.
And then from 1938 to now, we've won 18 premierships. So a real extensive history, but also there's a proud successful one there as well. And I think I was actually doing a little activity this year for our first, where we're just doing some jersey cards for the change rooms for our home games and looking at past players that played in positions.
Awesome.
And two that really stuck out to me that probably the players weren't aware of or knew who they were, but first one was Lloyd McDermott. So he's an old boy to the school. Obviously what he did for Indigenous people within rugby and how he grew the game and promoted the game through those communities, is just unreal. Then also Bob Templeton as well, so famous Australian coach. And our best and fairest award is actually the Bob Templeton medal. So having two individuals like that a part of the history is pretty cool. But then most recently, 2014 and 15, they won back-to-back premierships, and those teams were stacked.
Massive.
You had the likes of Kalen Ponga, Jaden Sewer, Harry Hawkins, Angus Scott Young, Liam Wright, the list go on, Brodie Croft. But then before that, you had David Pocott, Quade Cooper. And then even before that, you had Tim Walsh, who's obviously the coach of Australian Sevens now and gold medal winning coach. So, it's a really proud history and an extensive one, and probably not just the performance side, but participation as well. We have close to 600 or 700 students play rugby every year, probably up there with the top three programs in terms of participation as well. So it's an awesome community, and as I said, like a real extensive history and proud history as well.
Yeah, it sounds amazing, and just some of the names there, and that's cool about the school as well. That it's not just about who can be a Wallaby, but who's gonna have rugby as part of their connection to the school for the 4, 5, 6 years that they're going to spend there, and that can't be underestimated as well. Cool. And so how'd your first season go? What were some of the challenges and takeaways for you from a coaching perspective, and how are you applying that in terms of planning for next year?
There was many challenges. Firstly, I didn't commence until term 2.
Right.
So the program was up and running until term 1. So I basically commenced the week of the Easter camp. So in terms of this year's group, they went through term 1 with a bit of an unknown of what the year would look like. So that was a bit of a constraint in terms of you're thrown into the deep end, got to make relationships and keep the ball rolling pretty quickly. And then the other one was COVID. We unfortunately got to round 3. We were literally hopping on a bus to go up to Ipswich to play, and a lockdown was called. So we all went home and bunked it up for the next 4 weeks, and the competition was basically put on hold for 4 weeks. So out of a 9-round competition, some teams only played 4 competition games, like ourselves, and then some teams played 5. So that was a big challenge, especially with the Year 12 players and students of the group. That uncertainty of whether they're going to get back on the field and trying to keep the team together. There's many challenges around that. But we actually had a really good win in our first game, so we're on a bit of a high. So having 4 weeks off sort of was a challenge. But in saying that, like in terms of things we implemented and how the team performed, there's a lot of things will roll over into next year. One of the big things I asked the group when I commenced was what they wanted to get out of the year and what some of the challenges they had in previous years. And one thing they'd really struggled with was being able to beat some of the top 3 schools, some of the bigger, well-known, respected oppositions. And we'll able actually to beat 2 out of 3 of them this year, one in our last trial and then one in the first game. And then our first game back after the COVID break was against Nudgee College, who was probably the best team in the competition this year. And we had a real competitive game against them, but they were probably just a bit too good on the day. But in saying that, the work the leaders in the Year 12 cohort did in terms of getting those wins, hopefully will have big influence on what we can roll into next year in terms of confidence and belief, not from a first 15 perspective, but also from a whole school program perspective as well.
Yeah, I'm curious about, with that lockdown right in the middle of the season, how did you go about managing, the players and their emotions and their expectations around that time? What kind of resources did you use? What help from the school did you get for those kind of important things?
Yeah, I guess we were pretty focused on not concentrating on it too much. Like the reality is everyone had to go down, stay at home. We kept constant communication. We didn't overdo it. We got the boys into their gym programs, and we weren't stressing that they had to do it, or we didn't want them to send pictures or anything like that. It's sort of more around just keeping in the communication, making sure that they're all healthy of mind, but also keeping healthy physically as well. And just made sure that there was some consistent communication, so it didn't go the other way where they just put the tools down and that was it. Luckily, the lockdown was a short one, so I think it was within 2 weeks we're kind of back in school and able to start some kind of training. So there wasn't a huge period off, and I think if it did go a little bit longer, obviously it would have eaten into the season anymore, and that it could have become a bit more of a challenge then. But I think not overdoing it, not stressing that we had to keep on top of things, just sort of letting the guys do their own thing, keep fit, and they were pretty good in terms of always sending pictures of themselves doing gym and all that sort of like the boys sort of led that themselves, and I think that allowed us when we did start back up, that were really keen to get back going rather than having been tried to jam it down their throats for the last couple of weeks sort of thing.
No, it's a good approach, and they've got enough stress. There would have been academic stress as well, and who knows what else. It sounds like you nailed it. Changing tact a little bit, you recently presented at the University of Queensland Sports Coaching SIG with former podcast guest Johnny McMurtry, where you were discussing player leadership groups. What was a bit of a summary on your presentation, and what are some of the key points that you feel that coaches could apply from this?
This is something I'm really passionate about. I think it probably stems from the want and need to create a player-centered environment, ensuring that it's not coach-led, that players have a say, there's a bit of autonomy there, and they can take ownership for their development and performance. And I guess why I'm so interested in it is because, I really think it's a generational thing that young men these days don't get the opportunity to actually experience leadership. They're not out and about like we probably were back in the day, riding around the neighbourhoods, playing games, all that sort of stuff. And it's obviously their life is very technology heavy now. The interactions and the way they have to manage and deal with people is totally different to what past generations have had to experience. So my learnings is that leadership's not a natural thing for anyone, but especially for these young men coming through school and even into the club scene as well. So as much as you want to give players autonomy and give them ownership, it becomes quite challenging to get a really strong player-led environment. So I linked up with Johnny, who's an absolute legend and guru on a lot of things, but basically just collaborated with him when I started at Churchie, more on using his knowledge to pick out academic work that I could utilise in my program, but then also just use him as a sounding board to throw ideas at and hopefully formalise a few little things that I could utilise. And one of the things we landed on was the leadership group, so how I work with them and then how we can utilise them to get that player-led environment efficient, but then also get them taking ownership of their behaviours and standards and all that goes towards a good program. I guess what we presented on was what I'd done this year, which was nothing crazy, but then we utilised that to start a discussion and then hopefully formalise a better program for next year. And I guess the three main things I took away from it, and not just learnt but also validated from what I probably was already doing, but just formalised it a little bit. The first thing was utilising four main categories for sports leadership, and those four categories basically task. So a task leader being someone that can lead the technical tactical part of our program. Motivational, so someone who's good at encouraging, influencing others, bringing the best out of each other. The social side of it, so team culture, the connections with the team. And then the last one, which is something I took a lot out, the last in this framework before was external. So it was more around dealing with external stakeholders and that sort of stuff. But in talking to the experts, in the presentation was that's actually probably more suitable to be a standards leader around the 1%ers who's driving that training, that work ethic in the gym, on the field. So using tasks, motivational, social and standards as a framework to identify leaders, but then also to give roles to. The next challenge is finding the right people. So again, the right people in the boat, and using social network analysis, which is basically analysing group dynamics, investigating the social structures of your group, using that framework to identify the right people. And I guess what that process looks like is developing a survey with some questionnaires around those four groups and get individuals to identify others in the group who might suit them and give them a bit of a rating. But then they also do it on themselves. So I think it's important for people to identify the leaders, but then also for you to know whether they see themselves as leaders. Because, Andy might get votes in being the task leader and you might want him to be in the leadership group, but, you don't want to be a leader. So that might be able to start a conversation where you can sit him down and, maybe not so much convince him, but give him the information that people see him as leaders, and then that might be the point of difference of him buying into your program or not.
I'd be social, by the way.
You'd be social?
Yeah.
Good. So I guess in terms of how I want to formalise the identification process this year is formalise a survey where we get that information, but also hold a nomination process as well. where, same thing, formalising some question survey around those frameworks. They can put forward on how they want to lead and why they want to lead and what they might bring. And then actually I want to sit down with each of them and interview them. So I'm not quite sure if I'll call it interview because it might be a little bit more too stressful.
Yeah.
But, have a discussion around that so then I can get a gauge on where they're at also. So hopefully after that you get a good idea of who the team sees as leaders, who you see as leaders, but then you've had some communication and dialogue on who's the right fit, and then formalise a leadership group to then assist with the planning and implementation of the 2022 season. And there's a framework, a leadership framework, the 5 R's, which is basically readying, reflecting, representing, realising, and reviewing. So I know I'm waffling on here, but I love this.
It's all good. Well, let me jump in. Let me jump in 1 second. This, as you're saying that, it reminds me of Ray McLean, the guru of leadership groups, coined the phrase, I believe. But I love how it's actually more intricate than what I've read before. It's you're going through a thorough process. It's 100% democratic. And I love the concept of actually assessing the group from 2 different points of view, from the player themselves and the playing group. What's this the social network analysis? Can you talk a little bit about more about that? Is that something you've coined, or is that a more formal process?
That's an academic term.
Right.
It's basically like some of the studies I'll be going to are pretty in depth and provide leaders a really in-depth look at who communicates with who, the relationships within the group, and it sort of brings out trends on who people see as leaders and who's most popular and that sort of stuff. But I guess basically that little framework provides you the opportunity to identify those key people. So how others perceive others, and then the group dynamics between it as well. So you might get someone who sees themselves as a leader, but once we can do the survey, no one else does.
It's not happening.
It's sort of highlighting and diving into those dynamics of the group. And I mean, as I said, you'd just be scraping the surface in the simple ways that I'll be looking to implement, but the theory behind it makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we've all been in those teams, right, where we've had teams where it's like a great leadership group and teams where it's a not so great one, or one that is like somewhere in the middle, and it's such an important part of it. Do you want to jump back into the 5 R's there and continue with that? I think there's some good stuff there.
So the 5 R's is basically, and the thing I've learnt the most out of it, it's probably it's what a lot of people are probably already doing, or hopefully some of the listeners are already doing, but it just provides a framework and sort of formalises the steps and processes. So hopefully once I've got a gun leadership group ready to go for 2022, I can bring them into the planning process, but then also educate on what I want to do with the program and what I see is important. But basically those 5 R's, as I said, sort of provides a framework around. The first one's like readying, so educating the group on the why, so the we, the team, why is it important? So having that team first mentality and sort of educating the group and providing them that knowledge first. The next one's reflecting, and this is where the players can start to be brought in and start taking the lead. So actually developing who we are, what we already are, and what our history is, and who we are as a collective right now. But probably the next important step is that representing. So that's more around who do we want to be, what do we want to achieve. So your goal setting, your core behaviours, your values and all that sort of stuff. And that's something that's led by the players. The next one's realising, so walking the walk. So that's probably going to be a little bit further into your program where you're day in, day out training, you're utilising that representing phase to highlight important behaviours, highlight people that are doing it well, where are we at? And then the last one's that reviewing. So it's just that constant review and discussion and you might amend, because the reality is we'll have a 3-term season, which is basically 8 months. So you might not get it right. You might have different personnel come in and out of the program. So if you're consistently reviewing it, there might be development in what you've reflected and represented upon.
I think that last part's the crucial part. I think if you're trying to drive standards and drive behaviours in a certain direction, there has to be that full 360 process and finishing with the review and having some conversations with players that maybe they've never had before and maybe that they're uncomfortable about. And sometimes that's not even the coach who's having those conversations. It's fellow players calling them up and saying, look, hey, here's where we're at right now and here's where we need to be. And that also galvanizes the group as well, I feel. So that review process, how would you run that in say a weekly cycle or in an off-season kind of cycle?
Yeah, and that's what I think, like, this framework in terms of those leadership roles, and then the framework of the leadership program provides an opportunity just for communication. And that's probably one of my motivations, is to try to give the individuals who might be invited into a leadership group or who are seen as leaders in the group the opportunity to actually lead and be good at it. Or be effective at it, I guess. So if they have an idea of what their leadership role is, what some of their key tasks are, what the collective behaviours and what we're trying to achieve, communication becomes pretty easy then. And you can develop easier action plans for them to weekly go out and execute. You can then come back and sit down and review them. Then you can formalise again for the following week. And it just gives a real clarity on what they should be doing, how they're doing it, and then how we can continue to grow and get better at it as well. And hopefully, as a coach, I'm not the guy always driving it. It'll take a bit of time, but the players start taking a bit of ownership. They start to get a bit of confidence, and you might have 4 to 6 guys in your leadership group, and then you've got 4 to 6 extra coaches on the ground doing some of your legwork, which hopefully will make my role easier as well.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the good stuff about coaching. When that stuff starts kicking in, you're like, okay, it's firing now. We're moving in the right direction really quickly. Cool. Yeah. Awesome. And, one of the other areas you're really interested in is using data to ensure training methodology and player development, especially in terms of the competition you're playing in and the style of play. You've been working with a couple of analysts, one I'm familiar with on Twitter. Can you talk to me a little bit about that and what the process is and how coaches could explore that?
Yeah, so I love, and same thing, hopefully I don't waffle on too much in this question as well, but
it's all good.
I see data as like the better informed you are about a subject, whether it's rugby or whatever, the better decisions, the better discussions you can have about it. But I also are really wary of, I don't think data should drive decisions and be the last point of call in terms of why you do things. I think like that coaching instinct and your coaching philosophy should be the main influencer, the main driver, but data can ensure that you are making better decisions, and also adding to innovation of your coaching instinct and philosophy as well. So the two main guys that I've done a lot of work with, firstly, Brendan Schultz from Rugby Ecology. I just said I think he's the guy big on Twitter. He's got his own platform that dives into the efficiency of rugby teams. And it's actually quite a unique model that in dealing with him and forming a pretty strong relationship, you can really start to look at the game in different ways and question your own team's performance and how it can get better. So basically, his efficiency rating is based on zonal gains. So if you're starting possession in one zone, whether you get it go to the next one, whether you maintain possession or lose possession. And it's obviously not as simple as that. There's a lot else that goes into it. But from that, it provides a rating of efficiency of your play. So you can basically dive into possessions of the ball in different zones and look how efficient a team is and isn't. And I mean, you can go into the delves of it, but what I get out of it is that questioning of how efficient your team is. So some of the big trends this year and some of the places where teams come unstuck are like your defensive C zone, like so from your defensive 22 to 50 metre, the efficiency of set piece getting out of that zone. So at times this year, our line-out possessions in that zone became quite poor in terms of our exit rate. When it was effective, it had correlation with team performance. We were playing well. So you can sort of utilise that and look firstly at how's your line-out winning ball, and then what do you obviously do from that to get out of that zone and be efficient. Another interesting thing is typically as well in your green zone, so from that attacking 22 to the halfway, is going multiple phases, so more than 3+ phases, teams' efficiency tends to drop. So same thing on that is that if we're playing heaps of footy in that zone and statistically you don't get a lot of pay for it, so what else might be the option?
What are we doing there?
And that ties into, I love the tactical kicking side of footy and where it's going at the moment. So can you do things a little bit differently there after you've had a crack to then put pressure on the opposition? Because typically as well, in your attacking zones, scrum line out, the better teams that have better set piece, they're quite efficient off first and second phase from line out. So if that's all scrum, so if that's you, how can you generate those possessions more often and stay consistently efficient from them? So it really questions your game model, and the reality is when you are more efficient with the ball in specific zones, it leads to better performance. So it's really, really interesting, and I'm actually catching up with him this week to get the end of the season report, so I can't wait for that. Anticipation of that is immense, which I'm looking forward to. The other one, other great guy I work with is a guy called Steve Chapman. So he'd be a bit of an unknown for everyone, but I got him involved in the program at Gregory Terrace when I was there, and it's more basically like raw data, so stats of the game around rucks, possessions in each zone, kicks in general play, kick to ruck ratios, the ruck to phase ratios, gain line, all that sort of stuff. And I guess what he's done in terms of the data he's generated, he's basically looked at a whole competition each year. And then from that, you can sort of look at what the better teams do really, really well. But then also he breaks it down into per team. So you can get a real clear demographic of how a team plays, or what's their strengths and weaknesses and that sort of stuff. So same again, you get a good idea of how coaches coach, how teams perform. It's always going to be cyclical in a way because people will leave the program and come in the program. But those competition averages have stayed pretty consistent over the last 3 years. And looking at the top 3 teams that I guess everyone wants to be a part of, like the key KPI, key performance indicators have been around high percentages of set piece. So winning your set piece ball and having a good set piece platform, lower kick to ruck ratio. So that's a really interesting one, especially in the school competition, because I don't see the GPS competition, there's not a lot of tactical kicking going on. So the lower kick to ruck ratios the better teams have had. And that can be player based as well. So those teams usually have the better game managers, but it's same thing. Can that be coached and can that be influenced?
And should it be as well moving forward? Your role is to develop players. So, that also has to come into it.
Yeah. Attacking 22 metre conversion. So, like green zone and attack, the higher percentages you have there correlates to winning footy games. And it's actually really interesting this year is we were up there in the top 3, but some teams were down around 4%. So 4% of their possessions they're turning into points in that zone, which is incredibly low. And that sort of goes back on why I love data, because if you're looking at the important influences on performance, but then also if you're good or bad at it, how does that reflect your training practice?
Oh, 100%, yeah.
So if you're attacking 22 metre conversion is critical, then how often are you working on that? And what is your philosophy in that zone? Do the players know it? Are they good at it? Because the reality is, you look at it, it's probably not a big part of the game that's done a lot of the training. It's probably more phase shape, set piece strike, that sort of stuff. Where if you can become highly effective in that zone, you're giving yourself more opportunity to score points, obviously.
Yeah. I think the same could be said about turnover ball as well. Like when you go from defence to attack, how often do you train it? I'm reading your mind.
Leads me on to yeah, you are, mate. Great minds think alike.
Perfect.
One of the stats that Steve looked at this year, off his own bat, which is something that he come up with himself, was probably not rucks turnover, but he was looking at that rucks turnover per team. How many rucks you obviously have before you turn it over, but then your kill percentage. So if you turn the ball over, the percentage of times you stop the opposition. And again, the top teams were good at that, but surprisingly, we were really poor at that. So we had a really poor percentage of when we turned it over.
Did you capitalise?
We didn't stop the opposition.
Oh, okay.
Right. Not so much stopping
when you gave it up.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's more attacking ruck turnover ball. So that's something for me to look at in this off season is look at how and why we were turning the ball over. But then again, what we did post that and what that resulted in. So it could be a part of our kicking game that we might not have been highly effective at, or part of our attack phase play or something like that. So from that bit of data I can look into and hopefully it can be a focus point for the program next year. So you could talk all day about it, and you can definitely go into rabbit holes of data and look into things that I think the big thing is sort of having that knowledge of how it might influence how you want to play the game, but then also how it can influence the competition you're playing. And so another example is in working with Terrace, we had all these competition averages, but then flipping over to Churchie this year, Churchie were a very good attacking team, but didn't generally kick a lot. So my big focus this year was to bring in more of a tactical exiting plan, so then we can play footy in better parts of the field and don't have to work as hard to score points. So knowing that, we already had a good attack, I didn't have to really change too much. I could keep some consistency with what was already done. But then, knowing that, kicking in all competitions, but kicking in this competition that we play in isn't done very well. We could get a bit more bang for buck on focusing on that in our training program.
No, it's fascinating stuff, and I love it. I think and any coach can do it really, depending on, it doesn't matter what level you're at. You can do it yourself. You can get the players to do it. You can have an assistant coach take the lead on it. But, ultimately it's got to be part of the solution. It's got to align. You have your coaching philosophies first, and then you, from that and the players that you have, you create your game model. And then, having those stats that fit into that game model then makes your practice planning so much more efficient and effective. You're not spending 15 minutes on stuff that you're actually already pretty good at, and there's other stuff that you're 4% at that you should be spending a lot of time on. So, there's loads of value there for sure. Cool. All right. And you mentioned in the introduction there that you're with Brothers, just come off a pretty successful stint with them. And, one of the things you said at the start of the show was that you're with Brothers, and you've got coaching roles there and with the first 15 as well. And you've come off a successful stint. In the lead up to this interview, you talked about one of the things was aligning some of the processes throughout the program, and how that was one of the key components to the success. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that was done with that club in particular, and what that looked like?
Yeah, so I was pretty lucky. I come into Brothers at a really good point in terms of there was a lot of really good work already established with the program. They had a big focus of developing the Colts over the last few years. So we had a number of graduating Colts program going to grades, and there was some consistency with alignment to start with. But I guess you look at the success we had. Like I think there was 3 years in a row where we won the club championship. We had, I think, every team bar one, and that was first grade, I think, for 2 of the 3 years in the finals. So we were going to grand final day. You'd have first to sixth grade in the grand final, and Colts won the Colts. Like, it was just awesome times. But, you know, firstly, you got to have good players, but good people, which we had an abundance of, and which made the alignment process so much easier. So I guess basically trying to make it as simple as possible is anything we did in the rugby program, which includes on and off field, it was the same for a first grader to the sixth grader to the Colts 4B player. So how we played, the style of play was aligned throughout the club, and our first grade coaches would lead that. So whoever's the head coach, he'd obviously lead the overview and oversight of it all in conjunction with myself, who would be sending the messages down the line through all the coaches and all the grades. But then our lead attack coach, lead defence coach, lead set piece coach, they would lead that philosophy throughout the club. So in the pre-season, those coaches would lead the full club pre-season. We'd do a full club. Anyone and everyone would come together for a 6-week block before Chrissy. And then that would start to streamline as we progressed into the new year, into squads and teams. And then, those coaches in the lower grades or who'd be working with they would work in with them, get to know the philosophy, get to know the principles behind it, get to know the methodology we wanted at training. And then they could then start leading them with their teams and squads as we started to narrow it down, which was awesome because what it did was, in terms of coach development, it came quite easy. We had a set style of play. Everyone was trying to do the same thing, the set terminology. It meant players were getting developed in the same way, and then they could progress through the grades and through teams easily. So they weren't going to different teams with different game models and calls or anything like that. And the reality in club footy, players play in different grades all the time. So there's some real consistency with that, which meant players coming in, knew the attack patterns, knew the defence pattern, knew the terminology. Like, it just added to the performance. And I guess the other big one was the off-field stuff. So we try to do everything as a club, team meetings. We'd swap from the bottom field where the lower grades was on to the top field.
Sweet.
Club barbecues, swapping training fields so the top guys would go down the bottom, all that sort of stuff. So everyone in the club felt wanted and a part of it. And then we even had there was a thing called the Brothers Way, which I don't think any of the players or probably hardly any of the coaches could tell you actually what it was, but it was just basically a set of values, which is always the same: honesty, respect, all that sort of stuff that we could preach in a way. But then also, if there's anyone stepping out of line, we could always revert back to the Brothers Way on what behaviours we want from people within the program. And we'd do an induction at the start of the year where any new player, they'd come in, they get a little bit of history of the club. This is the Brothers Way. First grade captain would talk, one of the old boys would talk, so they get a real understanding of what we're about. And then it did have a big influence on the off-field stuff, the social side of things. There become less problems, on the beers after the games, but it also really generated a really strong club culture. And if you have that, the footy side of things becomes a little bit easy as well.
Yeah, it's definitely a way to keep a club moving forward and growing and retaining players and coaches and making that environment as fun and as cohesive as possible. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And last one before we wrap things up, you're also the head coach of the Queensland Reds U18 team. That sounds like an awesome role. Can you tell me a little bit about what that role looks like, how much access you get to the players and what the competition looks like?
Yeah, so very fortunate to lead that Queensland Reds 18 Maroon team. So basically, I think it might have been 3 or so years ago, the pathway changed a little bit within Australian rugby. So it was traditionally Australian Schools, which was run by the Schools Association Union. But then Rugby AU and Super Rugby franchises took ownership of that, and basically it's now their responsibility to pick Reds 18's pathway players that usually go into academies, and then there's a number of academy matches held throughout the year. So in the first year we did it, we played Melbourne, and then had 2 games against New South Wales. And then at the same time throughout the year, the Force are playing Melbourne, the Brumbies are playing Melbourne, Force are playing New South Wales. So what it does provides an opportunity for obviously the academies of each Super Rugby franchise to play games for those guys that they have in that pathway to obviously showcase their skills and what they've learned within their programs. But then also that's where they pick the Australian 18s schools and representative team from. So the first year we did it, we ended up with an unreal team, and a lot of them have gone on to play Super Rugby already. So guys like Josh Fluke, Zane Nongor, Mac Brearley, a few of the guys actually just gone down with the Rebel. It was just a stacked team, and that was the team that went over to New Zealand, the Australian 18s team, and beat New Zealand in New Zealand. Unfortunately, we haven't played a game since then because of COVID, and it's kind of an unfortunate byproduct of obviously the crazy world we live in at the moment. Just from a rugby perspective, is these young players haven't had the opportunity to represent their state or country, and hopefully that will change next year as we potentially get back to normality. But I guess the commitments other than games are based more around the academy. So from a coaching perspective, the lead coach at the moment, Dale Robinson, with the Reds Academy, will lead that program. It's his role to develop that academy program. And then myself will come in and assist that. And then as we sort of get closer to game preparation, I take the lead on the team's preparation for that week with my assistant coaches. And then also with the white team, which is basically a second team. So we'll do our preps together and prepare together for upcoming games. I guess the main thing we try to achieve is to provide a Reds experience for these young players, so they get an opportunity to experience what a professional preparation week would look like, and also what that might look like within the Reds. So that first year we did, it was pretty cool. Thorny come down, Jim Mackay come down, Peter Ryan at that time, the defence coach come down, held some sessions, spoke to the boys. We had players come down. They did a full professional training week. So they walk away that, firstly get the opportunity to represent their state, hopefully win some footy games. But then also, this is what it might look like in the coming years if I continue to work hard and get the opportunity to be a professional footballer.
That's awesome. Yeah, it must be a buzz for the players and for the coaches as well. And looking at just going back to that, the alignment, the realignment of the U18s and the U20s for that fact, like it's there's been some changes and it's starting to bear fruit, and there's even some. Right now there's changes at the Super Rugby level, and a centralisation style model that's got an Aussie flavour to it that's a bit more unique. So I think there's sounds like there's some awesome things happening there on the ground.
Yeah, it's awesome to be involved, and when involved with it, but also when it's done well, it's a no-brainer in terms of like the benefit to have for the players and for the franchises and that sort of stuff as well. If we're all on the same page, it's a lot easier to work towards.
Yeah, 100%. All right, well, we always end the show with the same final 4 questions. When you were a kid growing up in Queensland, and Wally Lewis can't be your answer to any of these, who was your favourite player that drew you into the game and got you excited?
I always remember my old man taking me out to Ballymore and sitting on the old grass hill that used to run along the grandstand, not the back hill, and watching Australia versus Ireland. And my favourite player was Keith Woods, the ball-headed hooker.
Yeah.
Really skillful player. Like I remember he
changed the game
every now and then. But also confrontational, tough. Yeah, I used to love Keith Woods.
Yeah, no, he changed the position for sure. No, he was amazing. Awesome. And what about now? Who are some of the players? You've mentioned a bunch in the interview, but who are some of the ones that you like watching go around?
I think Rico Ione is just an absolute beast. Like when he gets the ball, I don't think there's anyone like him in world rugby in terms of his athleticism and what he does with the opportunity he's provided within that All Blacks framework. Then there's another one where I love watching him play. I'm a big Otago fan. It's the way they play footy and approach the game. I think I got his first name wrong, but Viliami Karui.
Right.
I played a little bit with the All Blacks Sevens as well.
Yeah.
But awesome left foot boot. He's got variation in his game, great kicking game, great attacking game, works hard off the ball. He's not just on his wing. Yeah, the way he's utilised within that Otago system is awesome. I love watching him play.
So we've had someone from Ireland and 2 Kiwis, so I'm going to have to press you for an Aussie here.
Teni Alatupu.
Oh, yeah.
Can't go past the top.
What a pick. Yeah, he's got it all. He's got the little no-look pass, the balk. It's all there. And he's
he's obviously got that, but his scrummaging's next level. I always remember going to a Wallaby session and watching the scrummaging up close, and his power he's able to transfer when he wants to, it's unbelievable. And to see it in real life, actually, you realise, why he can just decimate scrums when he wants to.
Yeah. Cool. And third question: what about coaches? Who's a high-profile coach that you like what they're doing?
He'll probably get a bit of a big head from if he listens to this, but a guy called Ryan Martin, who's actually just signed on with the Rebels as their assistant coach. So
nice.
Another Kiwi coach from Otago. But he's a real innovative coach around the attack, but also how he ties in the tactical kicking game to create better opportunities. Like I've learned so much from him in the last couple of years, and I'm actually really, really excited to see what he can do with the Rebel. I think the Australian players, obviously, that side of the game and part of the game are probably a little bit behind the Kiwis. So it'll be interesting to see how much progress he can make from the get-go. But he's really innovative, very attacking mindset, but also a really good skills coach. He's a big one I'm looking forward to follow.
Yeah, and that's interesting too, with the changes you're seeing in the Wallabies under Dave Rennie, that would align really well with what we're seeing there as well.
Yeah.
Cool. And final question: what about someone in the grassroots who's doing great work in your local community who deserves a shout out?
It's probably actually a guy called Damien Steele. So he is a brother's old boy from the club I obviously was at previously, and did a lot of coaching in Portugal and also in New Zealand, but is now a director of sport at a local private college in Brisbane. Right. But he leads the Rorig Elite Development Program at Brothers, which is basically an academy that we run for our up-and-coming players. Yeah, and he's I don't think because he hasn't been in the game within Brisbane for an extended period of time because he's been overseas, so not a lot of people will know him, but a really, really quality coach, good bloke, and how he thinks about the game, how he communicates to players is second to none, and he's a real quality operator.
All right, awesome, great way to wrap it up, and want to thank you for your time for coming on the show, Ryan. It's been awesome. I love the chat about the leadership model that you're developing and how you're aligning data with practice plans and the competition that you're working in. And I think there's a bunch out there for coaches to apply to their sessions. So I want to thank you again for coming on the show and giving up your time.
I appreciate it again for having me. I thoroughly enjoyed chatting.
All right. Perfect. Cheers, mate.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review via iTunes and keep listening for the next episode. You can also follow us via Twitter at RugbyCoachesCNR or via the website therugbycoachescorner.com. Until next time, keep sharing ideas to make the game better.